Okay, so our first speaker tonight is Ankita. Ankita is currently adulting in Austin, Texas. She loves all things Angular and design. Her most favorite things in life include outdoor activities, dogs, reading, Disney, and chocolate in no particular order. And tonight she's going to be talking about ditching ngdeep. So let's give a big welcome to Ankita.
Thank you.
Sure.
Right, I am sharing, I hope correctly. Okay, so yeah, I will be talking about teaching ngdeep. And I just want to have a disclaimer that what I'm about to present today may or may not work for your team because it's an architectural pattern and it aligns with our code, how we organize codes for our team and how we have our components broken down. But it's worked really well, and sure most of you would be aware that ngdeep is deprecated, so being able to stay away from it. So let's dig deep into it. This is me. I'm Ankita. I am currently working for Dell SecureWorks. We work for a cybersecurity app, and I'm also the host of Angular Nation South Asia. If you are not on Angular Nation, I definitely think you should be. It's a fun place to meet cool Angular devs and hang out with them and learn from them. So come join us there, or otherwise you can connect with me on Twitter or LinkedIn. For those unfamiliar with ngdeep, I just have some definitions on this slide. And the way, like these are like the official definitions, but the way I understand it, or the way that has been helpful for me to understand ngdeep, is that it allows the parent component to reach out to the children and be like, listen to me. I will tell you how to behave. Like I am going to be defining your CSS styles or rules, and what I say you have to do. Like the parent is the one who is dictating the child component styles. So basically you use the CSS selector, pseudo selector ngdeep, and you specify your CSS rule inside it, and that's how you use ngdeep. Another popular alternative to avoid ngdeep but still be able to override CSS styles is to turn off view encapsulation, and you turn it off by setting it to view encapsulation none. But when you do that, I mean, I'm not sure you want to do that. You probably did it by accident. But if it works for you, if that solution works for you, great. We just prefer to stick to the default encapsulation, which is the emulated encapsulation. And you could still have that encapsulation and still not use ngdeep. What happens with view encapsulation none or with ngdeep is basically whatever you're writing in it becomes global, and there are better ways of defining your styles. So why do people use ngdeep even though it's deprecated? And I've been asking a lot of people this, and the most common answer that I get is because Stack Overflow said so, or because it's been there forever. But when people say like, what else am I supposed to do? And like, there are ways you can do, and that's where I'm hoping that you all will take away from this. If there are any other reasons apart from these three, like I would love to hear it. So if you could drop that in the chat, do let me know about it. And another good point to think of is, why are we talking about this now? Like ngdeep has been deprecated for so long, but recently when version 12 was 500 years ago, but still they deprecated one of these selectors for ngdeep, but they still have the pseudo selector ngdeep because they claim that there is no better solution for now. And whenever something is deprecated, I don't know about y'all, but I prefer to stay away from that thing. I run away from it as fast as I can. So what if I told you that there is a solution and that you don't have to use it? And so that thing that can help you stay away from it is host context. And it just requires you to rethink your styles for a little bit. It's useful to apply styles based on some condition outside of the components view. So host context is used to style elements inside a component based on some condition that you're giving to it. And so you must have heard of host, which is pretty common. And you just host just targets the component and you just write host and you just enter whatever styles you want for the component. But host context doesn't work by itself. You have to give it a condition inside it. But when you combine it with something, it becomes really powerful and it allows you to specify the styles of how you would want that component to be. So just like the previous example that I gave of ngdeep, I want you to think of host context that because you are applying it to the child component. So think of it as the child who knows how to behave in front of which parent. Like it knows like when I'm with this parent, this is how I get some extra candy, but when I'm with the other parent, I don't get candy. I just have to eat my broccoli. And so it behaves with that parent accordingly. Some people argue that using ngdeep inside the component keeps the styles closest to the code, like the parent. But I think sticking them in the host context makes it closest to their source, because that's the thing that you're changing. You're changing the child and not the parent. So if it's in the host context, it's closer to the source, if that makes sense. And you can view all of the variations that a child component might be behaving differently at one place. I think this would make more sense when we see examples in the future in the upcoming slides, but I also have links for things that explain host context differently. Or so I said differently, but I meant in depth, sorry. So just let's quickly glance at the difference between those two once again. So ngdeep, as the name says, it involves deep piercing, and in host context, as the name implies, it involves context of the host, and host is basically the component. And in ngdeep, the parent defines the styles of the child component, whereas in host context, the styles of the child component are defined in itself. And based on which parent it would be, that's how the styles get applied to the child component. So to demonstrate this, I came up with a simple app, just a basic list of requirements to have this demo. It basically has a child component, which should be styled according to the parent. So if it would be in a row view, the heading of the list should be hidden, but in the column view, it should be visible. And then the background color of the list is different, whether it's in the row view or the column view. And then you also have an icon, but it's right aligned. And this would make more sense again when we look at the code. But in the other thing is that the color of the icon is based on whether it's in the row view versus the column view. So keeping these requirements in mind, this is what it looks like essentially, that you have this column container, a column view, you toggle between the column view and the row view. And as you can notice, the background changes and the icon and the heading, the list of cute dogs, that changes. Like that gets hidden when in the row view it's hidden, but it's visible in the column view. So this is the parent template, where basically I'm toggling between the two views based on the toggle button selected. So the value of the row container basically gets, if you select row versus column, that's what gets applied over here. The value of the toggle button gets applied as an ng class on this article, which is a wrapper around the list. the list of the cards the 3 cards that you saw. And whether you're selecting row or column, that's the class that gets applied over here. And this is the child component, which is basically the list. It has that H2 as a heading, and then it has the 3 cards, and each card has a header. And we'll get to this class name or the naming convention in a bit. But just to highlight the code, it has that card header, and then it has that icon. If you were to use ngdeep, this is what the code will look like, that you have, based on the row container, you are applying ngdeep to the app list, and you would put this in the parent component SAS file. Wherever you are adding your list component, that's where you would put it. You would put like row container, ngdeep app list, and then you would have the background color change, and column container, ngdeep app list, and that's how you would change the background container. However, if you were to use host context in the child component SAS files, which is the list component SAS file, you would have the host context, and you would tell it that when it is under the context of the row container, when it is inside the row container div or the wrapper class that it has around it, this is what the background color should be like, and it should have the flex direction row and like don't display the H2 or the heading. And the column container have this background background color and flex direction. For the other thing, the one of the other requirement that we had, if we go back, that was way back, or was it? That the icon, the header should be right aligned. Now by default, and I'm using, if you've paid attention, I'm using the mat card component, the material card component. And so you just have a mat card header, and you have the title and the subtitle, and then you just can add the icon next to it. But this is how it, scroll. So this is how you have it in your component, in your template. And this is what actually gets rendered. So this is a screenshot when you inspect it. So if you notice this mat card header text, this div is not actually something that you write, because this is how material encapsulates its components, that you use some of it, but it's a web component. So it's isolated and it compiles in that sense. And so when you have things like a third-party library component or a web component that you're using, you feel compelled that you have to use ngdeep, because you don't really have access to the entire HTML. So how do you target it? How do you pierce through the shadow of that web component? And you cannot use host context inside the child component, because you cannot override material library code like that. That's what the emulated encapsulation is all about. So you can see like how material components are encapsulated in the screenshot, and it renders in a way that, what do you do? It's confusing. And so this is what you end up writing, in this, and this I'm assigning it flex row to do, just because I want it to have the entire width, and I want the icon to be pushed right at the end. So basically, I mean, this is just an example, like whatever variation you want to have for the mat card header text would be basically, this is how you would be using ngdeep inside. And so this is where things get interesting. And what I'm essentially doing is, instead of using ngdeep, I am placing this inside my global SAS file. And this is what global components, this is where all your global overrides would live. And so what this in what your material components are actually pure presentational components, STEM components. And if you're familiar with NX, they are your UI kit components. Basically, they're just for your, they just have presentational value. And you may use, you may be using a library, you might be using Angular material, or you might have your own presentational components as part of your design system. And combined together, those would make your complete design system for your app if you're using a part of this and part of that. For example, for the app that we are working on, we are using a modified version, a customized version of material, but we also have our own components, because material only has so many components, and what if we need a different kind of a card or something? So we have few variants of our own presentation components and a combination of that, and then you override them globally. And this essentially right here is BEM naming convention, where you have the component, the unicorn could be your design system name, or a unique name that you have for a particular app to distinguish it between different apps or different sections of the app even. And then you're seeing, like, in that app or design system, map that header, when it has the long text variation, then it should have the flex scroll value to be 2. And basically it allows the header text to be taking the full width or the full space and push everything else next to it. So it's just, it's an architecture pattern. It is a mind shift to be styling your components like that, but it works wonderfully, and you don't have to use ngdeep if you just adopt this pattern. I do have the link for the Stackbook links if anyone wants to grab that, and if anyone wants to go through it at their own time. I don't know if there are any questions or if you want a code walkthrough. Otherwise, those are all the slides I had, and bye.
I wouldn't mind a code walkthrough. We have time.
Okay. Okay. Good thing I have it open. So, okay. So disclaimer. In the slides I had kept it real simple. The code, the component, the repository that I have here has two levels of nesting instead of one, but it's exactly the same. It looks the same. It behaves the same. So you have all of that toggle group right here, the row container, and oh, is the font size still okay? I assume so.
Yes, it's still good.
Okay. All right, probably. Okay. So yeah, so as you can see, it has those toggle button groups, and then based on whatever gets selected, the list gets that. The list is basically wrapped around that class, whether it's a row container class or a column container class. So let's look at the list. So this is what my list is. It has this H2 and it has these 3 mat cards. And so over here, I am specifying when it's, this is all of the host, and it has all those styles right over here. But when it is inside a row container, to hide the H2 and set the flex direction to row. And when it's inside a column container, make it flex direction column and change the icon color value, mat icon color also. And doesn't hide the H2, so it's displayed by default. And like, if you were to look at this file, if you were not using host context, essentially this is what you would be seeing. Like, you would have it inside the parent, which is the content component, inside which you have the app list, and this is where you would be using ngdeep. so basically what I'm suggesting is that instead of having ngdeeping inside it in the parent, you just move it to the child and use host context instead. And so, yeah, and this is the other thing that I was talking about, that if you were to use ngdeep for a third-party library to shadow pierce through it, you would be adding the ngdeep over here. But instead, if you add it in your global, style file, if you have a proper naming convention, and if you add it over there, it makes it global. It is a defined structured pattern. It is clearly understood, and it avoids ngdeep. If anyone wants to look at that, this is what it looks like. Oh, probably don't need this. Super simple, that the color changes and based on whether you have a row or a column selected, it changes. Another cool thing about host context, and I didn't really have this in my slides, but if someone wants to look at the repo, they would notice that I have these two radio buttons, which is like a theme toggle. And so you could change the two themes. And that's another cool thing about host context, that you could actually nest it. So, oops, yeah. So if you have like the theme autumn, but inside, oh wait, that is the wrong file. So yeah, this is the right file. So if you have the theme autumn, but you also want to change the background, so you are changing the color for the card, and you're changing the color for the entire background based on whether it's row container or column container. So let me say this again, because it might be confusing. Basically, here's what you have in your styles file, that you have the host, and then you have something for the row container. That's just like the simple flex direction and everything, and something for the column container. So basically, when this component is inside a row container or a column container, you're changing the flex direction. But if you want to go a step further, and then you want to have, based on which theme you have selected, and then for that theme, which container you have selected, you could change the background colors like that. And so this is another way of theming your material components using host context. Actually, host context is the most common use for host context that I've seen, is to theme your components. That based on the theme that you have up top, you change the colors, but you could also nest it and have it like, okay, I am this child, but you could just have all your permutation combinations. Like when I'm in theme autumn, but I'm a row container, this is my background. But when I'm theme autumn, but I'm a column container, this is my background. And then I'm in another theme and I'm a row container, this is my background, So I hope that wasn't too confusing.
That was awesome.
Yeah.
Okay.
We have a couple questions. The first one's easy that I'm going to give you, which is, would you mind putting the link to the Stackbook in the chat?
Oh, absolutely. Not share. Copy, I think. Yeah.
Awesome.
Right.
Thank you. And then Mateo is asking, says MDN indicates that host context is not supported by Firefox and Safari. So he's wondering if it's only Chrome apps that can use it.
I'm glad that this question came up, because here's the thing, that the MDN link is about host context, which with reference to web components, but this is host context with reference to Angular components. And so the difference is that Angular has been working for all browsers, even i11 until recently when we dropped support, yay. But it has been working, even though web components API hasn't been adopted by all modern browsers yet. And Firefox and Safari haven't even announced support for a lot of web components. API browser, they haven't announced browser support for a lot of it. So the way this still works in Angular for all components is because Angular has emulated, that's the view encapsulation option, emulated, because it has emulated the web component. And so it's not exactly the web component that you see. Your Angular components aren't actually web components. There are emulated web components. It has its own strategy of creating components, which is why this works. And I actually have another talk prepared to go in depth about that, because that is the whole new can of worms about understanding how Angular renders its components based on the view encapsulation that you have selected. And that kind of talks more about how this works. But the short answer to that question is that host context will work for all browsers, just because of how Angular compiles its components.
That was a fantastic answer.
Yeah, that was.
Super impressive.
Were there any more questions?
Mateo had noted, I guess this isn't a question, but had noted saying that having styles in the child also keeps track of the contexts where you customize its styles, which usually isn't documented clearly, and it's prone to breaking changes over time.
Yes, that's a very good point, which is why I think if you adapt host context, and that's the thing that I was saying, like let the child decide how it behaves instead of the parent dictating how it should be behaving. And that just makes for a dev to understand clearly, like, why is my component looking differently over here? And they just open the style and like, okay, this makes sense. Instead of having to dig, but where is it coming from? Oh, okay, well, how has it been overwritten like that? And trying to go into the rabbit hole of finding it.
Definitely.
And can we get a copy of your slides?
Oh, of course. If I can figure out how to share it.
Or you can send them to us afterwards, whatever's easiest.
Oh, I found it. Oh, there you go.
Perfect. Awesome.
I think that was a really amazing talk. Are there any other questions? All right.
Okay. I will stop sharing.
Okay.
Thank you, Mateo.
Thank you so much. I love that talk.
That was, I am guilty of still using ngdeep when I get frustrated and I can't get something to work the way I want it to. And so I'm definitely going to be looking back on your talk the next time I want to use ngdeep. So I am very appreciative of it. I think that was awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Now our next speaker is Kyler. Kyler is a senior principal engineer with SecureWorks and co-host of Angular Americas on Angular Nation. When he's not writing code, Kyler loves adventuring with his family, reading, CrossFit, and testing new Linux distributions. Wow, that's a lot. Kyler is going to talk about encapsulating logic with abstract classes. Take it away, Kyler.
Good evening, everybody. I'm going to share my screen here. All right, can everybody see that? Awesome. Okay, so like Julie said, I'm going to be talking about encapsulating logic in abstract classes. So the first thing I want to talk about is what happens as our applications and organizations scale. Our applications get larger. We get more and more implementations across our app. We have a lot of times many teams working on the same code base. all with different ideas of how things should be implemented. And the problem with that is you have different teams working in silos, and they all have this different idea of how something should be implemented. So the result is that there isn't a lot of consistency across teams as your organization and your application scales. That's a very difficult problem to solve. And I think in the landscape of front-end development today, Angular does a great job at being really opinionated and providing us with the tools to help with that. But there are some avenues that allows our code to become inconsistent. And outside of Angular's opinionated structures, we have things like services, which are, a lot of times that is the culprit that I'm talking about here. Is as our applications scale, we have services that accomplish the same thing in a multitude of ways across teams and organizations. That can be a challenge from a managerial perspective in terms of onboarding. It becomes expensive. It becomes